The Duke had not come to Bennet Manor to fall in love. He had come to collect what desperation owed him. By 7 o'clock that evening, every candle in the front parlor had been lit, though their golden flames did little to warm the old house. Rain tapped against the tall windows in silver threads, sliding down the glass like secrets no one dared speak aloud. The carpets had been beaten, the silver polished, the cracked marble hearth hidden behind a screen of fresh roses that Mr. Bennet could not afford, and the two eldest Bennet daughters stood beneath the chandelier, as if they had been placed there by a careful jeweler. Vivian wore ivory silk and a smile practiced before 3 mirrors. Rosalind wore pale blue satin and lowered her lashes at precisely the moments that made older women sigh and younger men stare. Their mother, Mrs. Margaret Bennet, moved between them with nervous pride, adjusting a ribbon here, smoothing a curl there, pretending not to see the fear in her husband's hands as he stood near the fireplace with a folded letter pressed against his palm. Everyone in the room knew why Duke Alexander Whitmore had come. Everyone knew the Bennet estate was drowning beneath unpaid notes, failed harvests, and promises Mr. Bennet had signed with shaking confidence. But no one said the word debt. Not in that room. Not beneath candles. Not before a duke. Then the doors opened, and Alexander Whitmore entered in black evening clothes, tall and severe, his dark coat still carrying the scent of rain and cold air from the mile-long drive. He was 36, perhaps older in the eyes, with a face carved by discipline rather than softness, and the sort of silence that made servants lower their voices before he had even spoken. He bowed, not deeply, not warmly, and when his gray eyes moved across the parlor, they did not linger on lace, jewels, or practiced beauty. They measured the room as one might measure a battlefield already won. Mr. Bennet stepped forward too quickly. "Your Grace, we are honored beyond words." "Then use fewer of them," the Duke said quietly. The room stilled. Vivian's smile flickered. Rosalind's fan paused midair. Margaret gave a brittle laugh, as if coldness from a duke were a compliment in disguise. Alexander removed his gloves with deliberate care and placed them in the hands of his valet, who remained near the door like a shadow. "You know why I am here, Mr. Bennet." The older man swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace. Your estate owes more than it can repay." "Temporarily," Margaret inserted, her voice sweet as sugared tea. "A difficult season, nothing more." Alexander did not look at her. 3 difficult seasons, Mrs. Bennet, and a 4th winter coming. The rain struck harder against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Mr. Bennet's face had gone pale beneath the candlelight. "I had hoped we might discuss terms." "We will." Alexander turned then, his gaze passing from Vivian to Rosalind with cool courtesy. Neither girl breathed. Their futures, their gowns, their mother's ambitions, the whole collapsing Bennet name seemed to hang from that one quiet glance. The Duke stood before the fireplace, its flames throwing bronze light along the sharp line of his jaw, and said the words that made the room forget how to move. "I'll marry any of your daughters." Margaret pressed a hand to her chest, as if overcome by fortune. Vivian lowered her eyes in triumph. Rosalind smiled softly, already imagining Whitmore Hall, its grand staircase, its long galleries, its servants waiting for her command. Mr. Bennet closed his eyes for half a second, not in joy, but in relief so deep it looked almost like shame. Alexander watched them all receive the offer like a pardon. Then his gaze shifted to the far side of the room, where a 3rd chair sat empty beside the tea table. Its cushion was plain, unadorned, and slightly pushed back, as if someone had once belonged there and had learned not to sit down. "You have another daughter," he said. Margaret's expression tightened before she could hide it. "Clara is indisposed, Your Grace. She is young, rather excitable, and not suited to formal company." "How young?" 21, Mr. Bennet answered before his wife could stop him. Alexander's eyes returned to the empty chair. "That is not childhood." Margaret laughed again, thinner this time. "Clara has a kind heart, but she is not like her sisters. She is always running about the kitchens, the stables, the village. Charming in her way, of course, but hardly." The parlor door opened. Not grandly, not at the servant's announcement. Simply opened, pushed by a small gust of damp air and a girl who had clearly not been expected. Clara Bennet stepped inside with rain bright on her chestnut hair and color high in her cheeks from the cold. She was beautiful in a way the room had not prepared for, not polished, not arranged, but alive, with clear blue eyes, quick breath, and a face too expressive to survive easily among people who valued silence over truth. Her gray dress was clean but plain, its hem darkened by rain, and in her arms she carried a little tenant boy wrapped in her own shawl, his sleepy head resting against her shoulder, while an elderly maid hurried behind her in distress. "I am sorry," Clara said, breathless, looking first at the child and then at the room full of frozen faces. Mrs. Hale's grandson was shaking from the cold near the back gate. "I could not leave him outside." Her smile appeared for one brave instant, bright and apologetic, as if she had walked into judgment and decided to bring warmth with her anyway. Then she saw the Duke. The smile softened. The room waited for her to shrink. Instead, Clara shifted the child gently in her arms and dipped into an awkward curtsy, rainwater falling from the edge of her sleeve onto the polished floor. "Your Grace," she said. "Forgive me. I did not know you had arrived." Margaret's face burned scarlet. Vivian looked away with open embarrassment. Rosalind covered her mouth, but not quickly enough to hide her amusement. Mr. Bennet stared at the carpet as though it might open and spare him. Clara saw all of it. The shame meant for her. The laughter held behind teeth. The old lesson that she had entered too late, too plainly, too much herself. Yet she did not cry, and she did not apologize for the child. Alexander Whitmore, who had come to Bennet Manor to collect a debt, found himself looking not at the daughters presented to him like jewels, but at the one they had tried to leave outside the light. Clara felt the silence before she understood it. It moved across the parlor like winter fog, touching every candle, every polished spoon, every face that had turned toward her with disbelief. The little boy in her arms stirred, his lashes fluttering against cheeks still pale from the cold, and that small movement steadied her more than any polite greeting could have done. "Mrs. Hale is warming milk in the kitchen," Clara said, keeping her voice bright though her heart was beating far too fast. "He should be well once he is dry." Margaret crossed the room with a smile so sharp it might have cut ribbon. "Clara, darling, how very thoughtful. But this is hardly the moment for village emergencies." She reached for the child, as if removing an unfortunate stain from the room. Clara did not resist, but she bent close first and whispered, "You are safe now, Thomas. I promised, did I not?" The boy gave the smallest nod before the elderly maid took him gently away. Only then did Clara seem to remember herself. She looked down at her damp skirt, the rain on her sleeves, the plainness of her gown beside Vivian's ivory silk and Rosalind's pale blue satin, and for one painful second, the lively light in her eyes dimmed. Vivian stepped closer to the Duke, her voice sweetened into something meant to be overheard. "My sister has always had unusual hobbies, Your Grace. Stray children, broken fences, sick chickens. She is happiest where there is mud." Rosalind laughed softly behind her fan. "It is a kind of charm, I suppose, if one likes rustic habits." Clara lifted her chin, and the movement was so slight that most would have missed it. Alexander did not. He saw the blush climbing her throat, saw the way her fingers folded together to hide the tiny red marks left by a sewing needle, saw the effort it cost her not to answer cruelty with cruelty. She was embarrassed, yes, but she was not small. "I apologize for disturbing your evening," Clara said to the Duke, and there was warmth in her voice still, though it now wore a cloak of restraint. "I was not told I was expected." Margaret's smile tightened. "Because you were not expected." Mr. Bennet coughed into his hand. "Margaret, what?" "It is true. His Grace came to meet suitable daughters, not to be interrupted by Clara's little rescues." The word suitable fell into the room like a coin dropped into an empty church. Clara's eyes lowered, but only for a moment. When she raised them again, they found Alexander's face, not pleading, not hopeful, merely honest. "Then I will withdraw, Your Grace. My sisters are prepared for your visit, and I would not wish to waste your time." She turned toward the door. "Stay." The Duke's voice was quiet. It did not need to be louder. Clara stopped with her hand inches from the brass handle. Vivian's mouth parted. Rosalind's fan froze. Margaret looked as if a candle had gone out inside her. Alexander took one step forward, the firelight cutting across his dark coat and stern profile. "I asked to meet all of Mr. Bennet's daughters." Margaret recovered quickly, though not gracefully. "Of course, Your Grace, but Clara has had a long day and is clearly not dressed for company." I noticed. Clara's cheeks warmed again, but Alexander's gaze did not carry insult. It carried attention. That was somehow worse, because attention from such a man felt like standing beneath a high window in full daylight. "Why were you at the back gate in this weather, Miss Bennet?" he asked. Clara hesitated. The truthful answer would embarrass her father. The polite answer would be a lie. She chose neither at first, glancing toward Mr. Bennet with a tenderness that made him look away. "There is a gap in the west fence," she said carefully. "Some of the tenant children cut through when the lane floods. I meant to see if it could be mended tomorrow." "You meant to see it yourself?" "Yes." "In the rain?" "The rain was not as cold an hour ago." A faint sound of amusement escaped Rosalind, but Clara continued, a spark of her natural liveliness returning despite the room's disapproval. "And I have found that fences do not mend faster because one waits for sunshine." For the first time that evening, something shifted in Alexander Whitmore's expression. Not a smile, not softness, but the shadow of interest, dangerous because it was real. Vivian sensed it and moved quickly. "Your Grace, perhaps you would prefer music after such a dreary discussion. I have prepared a piece from Vienna." "Later," Alexander said. His eyes remained on Clara. "Tell me, Miss Bennet, when a house is in danger of collapse, do you begin with the drawing room or the roof?" Margaret laughed too loudly. What a strange question. Clara did not laugh. She looked at the roses hiding the cracked hearth, at the silver polish to disguise unpaid wages, at her father's trembling hand, and then back at the Duke. "The roof," she said. "Always the roof. A beautiful room means very little if rain is already coming through the ceiling." Alexander's gaze deepened, and the parlor seemed to grow colder around everyone but Clara. For years, they had called her too lively, too plain-spoken, too concerned with things beneath her station. But under the Duke's silent regard, the very qualities they despised began to look less like flaws and more like proof that she had been the only person in Bennet Manor still awake. The question about the roof remained suspended in the parlor long after Clara answered it. No one moved at first. Even the rain seemed to hesitate against the tall windows, as if the old house itself were listening. Alexander Whitmore studied Clara Bennet with the same unreadable attention he might have given a sealed letter found in a locked drawer. She stood near the door in her rain-darkened dress, cheeks still bright from the cold, chestnut curls escaping their pins, her blue eyes lively despite the humiliation pressed around her like a hand. She was not dressed to impress him. She had not been taught how to lower her lashes at the proper angle or arrange her hands like porcelain. Yet there was something startlingly graceful in the way she held herself after being laughed at, something no finishing school could have given and no jealous sister could counterfeit. "A practical answer," Alexander said at last. Vivian's smile sharpened. "Clara has always been practical, Your Grace. It is because she spends so much time with the staff. One begins to think like them." Margaret gave a soft gasp that pretended to be disapproval and was really permission. Rosalind added, "We do admire her charitable spirit. It keeps her occupied." Clara looked down, not in defeat, but in restraint. She had been raised among remarks disguised as compliments, each one wrapped in silk, so the wound would appear accidental. Alexander watched her receive them all without flinching. That interested him more than beauty. Beauty was common in drawing rooms. Endurance was not. "Occupied," he repeated, turning the word over without warmth. "Is that what you call the work of keeping children from standing in the rain?" Rosalind's color faded slightly. Vivian recovered first, stepping toward the pianoforte with a delicate sweep of ivory silk. "Your Grace, perhaps we have allowed the evening to grow far too serious. Music has always been the finest remedy for gloomy weather." She sat before anyone invited her to, lifted her hands, and began to play. The notes were elegant, precise, and lifeless, each one polished smooth by years of instruction. Margaret smiled with visible relief. Mr. Bennet stared into the fire. Clara remained standing by the door, uncertain whether she had been commanded to stay as a daughter or displayed as a mistake. Alexander listened to the first minute of music in silence. His eyes did not leave Clara. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Under that grave attention, she felt every damp fold of her skirt, every loose curl, every laugh still floating in the room. Yet beneath the embarrassment, another feeling stirred, small and dangerous. Curiosity. Most men looked at Vivian and Rosalind first because they were meant to be admired. The Duke looked at Clara as if she were a locked gate, and he had just heard something move behind it. When the music ended, Margaret clapped softly. "Beautiful, my dear. His Grace must be pleased." "Miss Vivian plays exactly as expected," Alexander said. Praise could not have sounded colder. Vivian's face stiffened. Rosalind stepped forward before the silence could turn against them. "I would be honored to show your Grace the embroidery I completed for the church charity. The pattern is from Paris." In a moment, Alexander turned to Mr. Bennet. "How many acres remain with the estate?" Mr. Bennet blinked, startled. "Approximately 480, your Grace." Clara's eyes flickered. Alexander caught it. "Approximately?" he asked. Mr. Bennet's hand tightened around the letter. 472 after the East Meadow was leased. Clara said it before she could stop herself. The room froze again. Margaret turned slowly. "Clara." The warning in her voice was soft enough for company and sharp enough for Clara to understand. Clara drew a breath. "Forgive me. I only meant that the number changed last spring." Alexander stepped closer. "You know the estate records?" "A little. She copies figures when the steward is overburdened," Margaret said quickly. "A harmless habit. Nothing more." "Numbers are rarely harmless when men are drowning in them," Alexander replied. Mr. Bennet looked as though the carpet had vanished beneath his feet. Clara wished, suddenly and fiercely, that the Duke would stop seeing so much. It was bad enough to be mocked for muddy shoes and kitchen errands. It was worse to be discovered. For years she had kept the ledgers at night after everyone slept, adding sums by candlelight, writing to merchants, delaying payments with cheerful phrases and careful promises, pretending the household survived because her father was wise and her stepmother was lucky. She had never asked to be thanked. She had only wanted the roof to hold through winter. "Miss Bennet," Alexander said, and the way he addressed her made all three sisters turn, because for the first time that evening the title sounded as if it belonged fully to Clara. "If this house had $100 left and 3 debts due by morning, which would you pay first?" Margaret gave a brittle laugh. "Surely this is unnecessary. The question was not for you." Clara looked at her father, then at the roses hiding the cracked hearth, then at the rain trembling against the glass. Her lively face grew quiet, but not dull. It became focused, illuminated from within by the very honesty her family feared. "I would pay the coal merchant first," she said. "Food can be stretched. Pride can survive another letter. But cold enters every room, your Grace, and it always reaches the weakest people first." Alexander said nothing. The answer had struck something old in him, something buried beneath titles, stone walls, and years of refusing to be moved. He looked again at the daughter they had tried not to show him, and in the hush that followed, Clara Bennet stopped being late. She became impossible to ignore. The coal merchant's name was still echoing in Alexander Whitmore's mind when Margaret Bennet decided that Clara had been seen enough. The older woman moved between them with the smooth urgency of someone closing curtains before a storm could enter. "How amusing that Clara remembers such details," she said, smiling with every feature except her eyes. "She has always been fond of accounts, though I fear she mistakes household errands for management." Clara's shoulders drew back, and the lively brightness in her face dimmed beneath discipline. She had spent years learning how not to defend herself when defense only invited sharper laughter. Yet tonight, before this cold Duke and these burning candles, silence felt heavier than usual. Vivian rose from the pianoforte, her ivory skirts whispering across the carpet. "Mama is right. Clara is useful in her way. Every family needs someone willing to fuss over coal bills and fence posts." Rosalind tilted her head with gentle cruelty. "It is almost sweet." She never cared much for gowns or accomplishments, so she made herself necessary elsewhere. Mr. Bennet stared at the fire as if the flames might answer for him. Clara looked at him once, hoping for one word, one small correction, one fatherly hand placed on the truth. Nothing came. The room had judged her many times before, but never so beautifully, never beneath so many candles, never in front of a man whose silence made every insult sound less clever than it had been intended to be. Alexander set his untouched glass of sherry on the table. The crystal touched wood with a soft, final sound. "Necessary is not an insult, Miss Rosalind." Rosalind's fan trembled. "Of course not, your Grace. I only meant that Clara's interests are rather plain. Plain things keep grand houses standing." No one answered. The rain pressed against the windows. Somewhere beyond the parlor, The old roof gave a faint groan in the wind, as though proving him right. Margaret's smile thinned. Your Grace is generous to notice her little virtues, but surely you did not come all this way to discuss servants, fences, and ledgers. No, Alexander said. I came to choose a wife. The words struck the room into a new silence, sharper than the last. Vivian's eyes brightened with renewed hope. Rosalind lowered her lashes, arranging herself into softness again. Margaret stepped back, satisfied that the conversation had returned to its proper road. Clara, relieved and strangely wounded at once, moved toward the wall where shadows gathered. She was accustomed to that place. Not hidden entirely, not welcomed fully, close enough to serve, far enough not to matter. Alexander saw her retreat. He wondered how many years she had been trained to disappear while keeping the house alive around those who never thanked her. Then perhaps, Margaret said, your Grace would allow each girl to present what she might bring to Whitmore Hall. Vivian has been educated in music, French, and society manners. Rosalind has a remarkable gift for correspondence and charity circles. And Clara? Alexander asked. Margaret paused. Clara is very kind. The word was offered like a napkin covering an empty plate. Clara almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was to feel the old ache too deeply. Kind. That was what people called a woman when they had taken everything else from her and wished to make the taking sound polite. Alexander turned to Clara. What would you bring to Whitmore Hall? Every face moved toward her. Clara's first instinct was to step back. Her second was to smile, because smiling had always made uncomfortable people less cruel. It appeared now, bright but fragile, a small lantern in a room determined to blow it out. I am afraid I would bring very little that would impress a duke, she said. Margaret exhaled in relief. Vivian smiled. Rosalind looked down to hide triumph. But Clara continued, and her voice steadied with each word. I cannot promise the finest parties in the county. I do not know which fork London prefers for fish when the Queen is watching. I have only 2 evening gowns, and one of them has been altered 3 times. A few servants near the doorway lowered their eyes. Clara clasped her hands together. But I know how much flour remains in the pantry before a storm. I know which tenants need seed, and which are too proud to ask. I know that a cracked chimney can poison a nursery with smoke, that unpaid wages sour loyalty faster than hunger, and that a house begins to die long before its master admits it. Margaret whispered, Clara, enough. Clara stopped at once, as though the command had touched an old bell inside her. The brightness left her face again. Forgive me. Alexander did not move, but something in him did. It was not affection. Not yet. It was recognition, cold and piercing. Years ago, in another house, on another winter night, he had ignored the small warnings of servants, physicians, and weather because grief had already made him arrogant. By morning, the woman whose portrait still lay locked inside his pocket watch was gone from his life, and Whitmore Hall had never truly warmed again. Now this girl, rain-damp and humiliated, spoke of houses dying before their masters admitted it, and the words found the sealed chamber inside him. Do not apologize, he said. Clara looked up. The room seemed to draw breath around them. Alexander's gray eyes held hers with a force that made her forget the wet hem of her dress and the laughter of her sisters. For once this evening, he said quietly, someone has told me the truth. The truth had a strange effect on the room. It did not make anyone grateful. It made them afraid. Vivian's polished confidence faltered first, then Rosalind's careful sweetness, then Margaret's smile, which remained on her face only because pride held it there like a pin through silk. Clara stood beneath their stares with rain drying slowly at the hem of her gray dress, her blue eyes bright but uncertain, as though she had stepped too close to a fire and did not know whether it would warm her or burn away what little safety she had left. Alexander Whitmore looked from one Bennet daughter to the next, and the comparison was no longer the one Margaret had intended. Vivian was beautiful, but she had been trained to be admired. Rosalind was graceful, but every gesture asked to be rewarded. Clara was neither prepared nor protected, yet she alone had spoken of winter, wages, cracked chimneys, and the quiet ways a household failed its weakest people. That was not charm. That was stewardship. I will ask each of you one question, Alexander said. Answer plainly. Margaret's eyes brightened with quick calculation. A test could still be won if she controlled the stage. How thoughtful, Your Grace. The girls will be delighted. Not delighted, he said. Honest. The word passed through the parlor like a draft beneath a locked door. He turned first to Vivian. If you became Duchess of Whitmore, what would you do with power? Vivian's smile returned at once. This was a question she had waited for all her life, though never in those exact words. She lifted her chin, the candlelight gleaming across the pearls at her throat. I would restore Whitmore Hall to its rightful place in society. Grand dinners, winter balls, perhaps a charitable concert each season. A duke's house should be admired, Your Grace. It should remind people of rank, refinement, and influence. Margaret nodded proudly. Mr. Bennet gave a faint sigh of relief. Alexander inclined his head, neither pleased nor displeased. I see. He turned to Rosalind. And you? Rosalind folded her hands with tender modesty. I would use my position to build alliances. London can be unkind to families who appear isolated. A duchess must be careful whom she invites, whom she visits, whom she favors. Power is best preserved when everyone of consequence believes they have a place near it. Her answer was smooth as cream poured over a silver spoon. Alexander's expression did not change. Preserved, he repeated softly. Then he turned to Clara. She had not expected to be asked. That was clear in the way her eyes widened, in the small breath she took before remembering that everyone was watching. Miss Bennet. Her name and his voice sounded far too formal for the sudden beating of her heart. What would you do with power? Margaret stepped in quickly. Clara has already had quite an evening, Your Grace. Surely her sisters have answered well enough. I asked Clara. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara looked toward the windows, where rain blurred the dark lawn and the last of the roses trembled against the glass. Her lively nature wanted to answer lightly, to soften the moment, to make everyone comfortable again. But the Duke had not asked for comfort. He had asked for truth. I suppose, she said slowly, I would first find out who had been afraid to speak before I arrived. Vivian made a small sound of disbelief. Rosalind's fan snapped half shut. Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. Power makes people polite, Your Grace. Too polite, sometimes. A tenant will say the rent is manageable because he fears losing his cottage. A maid will say she is not tired because she fears losing her place. A steward will hide rot in the West Wing because repairs cost money no one wishes to discuss. So I would listen first. Not in the drawing room. In the kitchens, the stables, the laundry, the fields. Then I would decide what must be repaired before winter punished us for pretending. No one laughed this time. Even Margaret seemed to understand that ridicule would only sharpen the answer. Alexander's hand moved toward his waistcoat, where an old pocket watch rested against his heart. He did not open it. He only felt its weight, the cold circle of memory beneath black cloth. Whitmore Hall had once been full of polite people. Polite servants who did not challenge a grieving duke. Polite relatives who spoke of appearances while illness moved like mist through shuttered rooms. Polite silence had cost him more than scandal ever could. Clara Bennet, with her damp hem and unguarded eyes, would have broken that silence. The thought unsettled him. It also held him still. That is an unusual answer, he said. Clara's mouth curved faintly, a spark of her natural brightness returning despite the tension. I have been told I am an unusual daughter. Margaret seized the opening. Exactly, Your Grace. Dear Clara is spirited, but a great house requires polish, not merely good intentions. Alexander finally looked at her, and the room cooled. A great house requires someone who knows when the roof is leaking. Margaret fell silent. Vivian's face had gone pale beneath its careful color. Rosalind stared at Clara as if seeing not a sister, but a door she had failed to lock. Alexander stepped away from the fireplace and crossed the carpet with deliberate calm. He stopped before Clara, close enough that she could see rain still shining on the shoulders of his coat, far enough that propriety remained untouched. Miss Bennet, he said, were you told to remain unseen tonight? Clara's smile disappeared. Her eyes moved once to her father. Mr. Bennet closed his own. That was answer enough. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. Then I have seen enough. Alexander's words left no room for easy repair. Margaret drew herself upright, her jewels flashing at her throat like frost caught in candlelight. Your Grace, I must protest. Clara is sensitive. She misunderstands our efforts to protect her. Clara's expression changed so quickly that only Alexander saw it. Surprise first, then pain, then the lively mask she had worn for years, attempting to rise again and failing. Protect. There were words that could make neglect sound noble if spoken in a beautiful room. Margaret had mastered all of them. Protect me from what, Mama? Clara asked softly. The title was gentle, but everyone heard the distance inside it. Margaret's mouth tightened. From embarrassment, dear. From expectations for which you were never prepared. Vivian stepped nearer, eager to restore the old order. No one meant harm, Clara. You are simply better suited to quieter duties. Rosalind nodded with practiced sorrow. And you never seemed to mind them. For the first time that evening, Clara laughed. It was not loud. It was not cruel. It was a small, bright sound that trembled at the edge before vanishing into the rain. I minded, she said. The simplicity of it struck harder than accusation. Mr. Bennet looked up, his face suddenly old. Clara turned toward him, and her voice softened because love, even wounded love, does not always know how to become anger. I minded when my lessons stopped because Vivian needed a music master. I minded when Rosalind was taken to Boston for the spring season, and I was told someone must stay home to oversee the pantry. I minded when Mother's writing desk was moved from my room because it looked better in the front hall. I minded every time a guest asked whether there were 2 Bennet daughters, and no one corrected them. No one breathed. Clara seemed almost startled by her own honesty. Color warmed her cheeks, but her eyes remained clear. But I also knew the flower orders, and the coal accounts, and which roof tiles needed replacing before the first frost. Someone had to mind those things too. Alexander felt the room alter around her. Until that moment, Clara had been a late arrival, an inconvenient daughter, a charming disruption in a damp dress. Now the old house itself appeared to gather behind her. The ledgers hidden in drawers, the unpaid bills delayed by careful letters, the servants kept loyal by kindness when money failed, the tenants remembered by name. Margaret saw it too and moved to crush it before it could stand fully. How dramatic. You speak as if you have carried the estate alone. Clara's gaze dropped to her hands. There were faint ink stains near one finger, almost hidden beneath the marks of needlework. Alexander noticed them as one notices the seal on a document that changes everything. Have you? He asked. Clara did not answer. Mr. Bennet did. She has helped, he whispered. Margaret turned on him. Edward. But shame had loosened something in the older man that fear could no longer hold. More than helped. His voice was rough, unsteady. After the East Meadow failed, I could not make sense of the accounts. Clara did. When the miller threatened to refuse us credit, she wrote to him. When I considered selling the South Orchard, she found another way. Vivian's face had gone blank. Rosalind stared at her father as if he had betrayed them by telling a truth they had all used. Clara looked wounded by the confession, not proud. That, more than anything, moved Alexander. She did not want triumph. She wanted not to be exposed like a secret ledger laid open before strangers. Papa, please, she said. Mr. Bennet covered his eyes. I am sorry, Clara. 2 candle flames guttered near the mantel, and the shadows leaned across the wallpaper. Alexander turned to Margaret, his voice controlled. You hid the daughter who kept this house standing. Margaret's pride flared. I presented the daughters fit to be duchess. No, Alexander said. You presented the daughters trained to appear fit. Silence fell with the weight of a closing gate. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever defended her so plainly. Not with warmth, not with pity, but with judgment sharp enough to cut through the velvet lies around her. Yet instead of relief, fear stirred in her chest. A duke's defense could become another form of ownership. A man might lift a woman in public only to place her somewhere else for his own purpose. Alexander saw that fear cross her face, and something in him quieted. He had come to buy an answer to a debt. He was beginning to understand that Clara Bennet could not be bought without being ruined. Miss Bennet, he said, softer now. Where are the ledgers? Margaret stiffened. That is a family matter. Clara looked toward a narrow cabinet beside the writing desk. Alexander followed the glance. Bring them. No one moved. Then, from the doorway, the elderly maid who had carried the child away stepped forward with trembling courage. Miss Clara keeps the current book in the blue drawer, Your Grace. The one with the cracked handle. Clara turned, startled. The maid lowered her eyes. Forgive me, miss, but it is time someone said it. The room had mocked Clara for being late. Now it waited while every hidden hour of her life walked quietly into the light. The blue drawer opened with a sound so small that it should not have changed anything, yet every face in the parlor turned toward it as if a church bell had struck midnight. Mrs. Hale, the elderly maid, drew out the ledger with both hands, its worn leather cover softened by years of use, its corners dark from candle smoke and careful fingers. Clara stepped forward at once. "Mrs. Hale, please, you need not." "Yes, miss," the maid said, her voice trembling but clear. "I do." She placed the book on the table before Alexander and then looked at Mr. Bennet with the tired courage of a woman who had swept too many secrets beneath too many rugs. This house would have closed its doors before last Christmas if Miss Clara had not gone through these pages night after night. Margaret's face hardened. "That is quite enough from the staff." Alexander did not raise his voice. "Let her speak." Mrs. Hale lowered her eyes, but she did not step back. When wages were delayed, Miss Clara paid what she could from the pin money left by her own mother. When the south pantry ran low, she sold the pearl comb she was meant to wear at her first dance. When little Thomas needed a doctor last spring, she sent for one and told him the charge was to be placed under household repairs, so no one would turn the child away. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, humiliated not by wrongdoing, but by kindness made public. She had never wanted her small sacrifices displayed beneath chandeliers. She had wanted them to remain what they had been, quiet answers to immediate need. Vivian looked at her sister as though trying to recognize a portrait after the dust had been wiped away. Rosalind's fan lowered slowly. Mr. Bennet's mouth trembled, but still he said nothing. Margaret did. "Sentimentality," she snapped. "A duchess cannot run a great estate on sentiment." Alexander opened the ledger. The pages were precise, columns written in Clara's fine, slanting hand. Flour, coal, seed, repairs, wages, interest due, interest delayed, letters sent, replies received. There was no ornament in the record, no dramatic complaint, only discipline, intelligence, and a mercy so practical it had become invisible. He turned one page, then another. "This is not sentiment," he said. "This is governance." Clara's eyes flew open. The word struck her more deeply than praise would have. Governance. Not fussing, not meddling, not a harmless habit. Governance. For years, she had been called lively when she spoke, troublesome when she noticed, and sweet when she obeyed. No one had ever given a proper name to the work of her hands. Margaret moved toward the table. "Your Grace, surely you must see that Clara has overstepped." She had no authority to interfere with estate matters. And yet she had the competence. Competence is not breeding. Alexander looked at Vivian and Rosalind, then at Margaret. "No, it is rarer." The room seemed to shrink around those words. Clara felt the air change, felt the old shape of her life cracking beneath her feet. She should have been relieved. Instead, she was frightened, because every hidden thing, once revealed, demands a price. Alexander closed the ledger and rested his hand upon it. "Mrs. Bennet, earlier you said Miss Clara had no value suited to my house." "I said no such thing." "You said enough." His gaze was cold enough to silence her. "You measured value by polish, gowns, and the ability to flatter a room. I measure it by what remains standing after winter." Vivian's eyes glistened with angry pride. Rosalind looked away. Clara's heart ached for them despite everything, because even cruelty taught in a home becomes a kind of inheritance. Alexander stepped back from the table and faced the entire parlor. The servants at the door, the father by the fire, the sisters beneath the chandelier, the stepmother with diamonds at her throat, all of them stood inside the same judgment now. If I wanted decoration, I would purchase a painting. If I wanted obedience, I would hire another steward. If I wanted a woman trained only to smile beside my name, I could find 100 by morning. His voice lowered. But Whitmore Hall is not in need of another beautiful silence. Clara could not look away from him. The firelight had softened nothing in his face, yet something in his eyes had shifted, as if a locked room far inside him had received, not light, but the first thin line beneath the door. He turned to her, and the room followed his gaze like iron drawn toward a magnet. "Miss Bennet," he said, "you were hidden from me tonight." Clara swallowed. "I was not meant to offend you." "You did not." "Then what did I do?" Alexander's answer came after one measured breath. "You made everyone else visible." No one spoke. Outside, rain slid down the windows in silver lines. Inside, Clara Bennett stood in the center of the room that had spent years pushing her toward its edges, and for the first time, every eye remained on her, not because she had arrived late, not because her dress was plain, not because she had broken some delicate rule of society, but because the Duke of Whitmore had looked upon what they despised and named it worthy. Alexander's judgment did not land like thunder. It landed more quietly, and therefore more completely. Margaret Bennett stood very still, her fingers closed around the edge of the tea table, while the candles shivered in their brass holders, and the rain continued its soft, relentless tapping against the glass. Vivian's proud mouth trembled once before she pressed it into a line. Rosalind lowered her fan to hide the expression she could no longer arrange into sweetness. Clara, at the center of them all, looked as if she wished to step backward and had forgotten where the shadows were. Being ignored had been painful. Being seen was terrifying. Alexander understood that before she said a word. He had seen soldiers stand calmer before danger than Clara Bennett now stood before recognition. Her beauty, made vivid by embarrassment and candlelight, was not the fragile kind her sisters had cultivated. It lived in movement, in quick eyes, in the breath she took before choosing honesty over safety, in the stubborn brightness that hardship had not managed to extinguish. Yet beneath it was fear, and he knew fear too well to mistake it for weakness. He lifted the ledger from the table and held it out to Mr. Bennett. "This debt will be settled tonight." Mr. Bennett stared at him, stunned. "Your Grace." Margaret's face changed at once, hope rushing back into it like color into a painted cheek. "How generous. Truly, our family will never forget such mercy. Do not thank me yet." Alexander's voice was quiet, but every person in the room felt the door close behind it. "I will not rescue a house only to leave its foundation rotten." Clara looked up sharply. Margaret's smile vanished. "I beg your pardon. The Bennett estate will be placed under legal protection until its accounts are corrected. Wages will be paid first. Tenant penalties from the failed harvest will be forgiven. The west fence, the roof, and the chimney Clara mention will be repaired before the first snow. The south orchard will not be sold." Mr. Bennett sank slowly into the chair beside the hearth as though his legs had given way under relief and shame together. Vivian whispered, "But the season in Boston." Alexander did not look at her. "There will be no season purchased with unpaid labor." Rosalind's eyes flashed. "And who will decide all this?" "Miss Clara Bennett already has." Clara's breath caught. "Your Grace, I have not asked for authority." "No," he said, turning to her. "That is precisely why I trust you with it." Margaret stepped forward, dignity fraying at last. "This is absurd. Clara cannot command this household. She is unmarried. She has no title, no dowry, no social polish. Whatever sentimental impression she made tonight, she remains the least suitable daughter I possess." The room inhaled around the insult. Clara went pale, but she did not look away. Alexander's expression did not harden. It became still, and that was worse. He crossed the carpet until he stood before Margaret, not close enough to threaten, but near enough that she had to lift her eyes to meet his. "You are mistaken, Mrs. Bennett." His words were measured, each one placed like a stone in a wall that would not fall. "You do not possess her." The silence that followed was deeper than shock. It was recognition. Clara felt it move through the room, felt the old invisible chains of obligation, gratitude, and guilt loosened by a single link. She had spent so long being useful that she had forgotten usefulness was not the same as belonging to those who benefited from it. Alexander turned back to her then, and for the first time that evening, his voice changed. Not warm, not tender, but honest enough to be almost gentle. "Miss Bennett, I came here intending to take a wife as payment for a debt. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise." Clara's eyes searched his face. "Then why say it aloud?" "Because if I do not name the cruelty of it, I become part of it." The answer unsettled her more than flattery could have done. Around them, the parlor seemed to fade. Vivian's anger, Rosalind's disbelief, Margaret's outrage, Mr. Bennett's bowed head, the roses hiding the cracked hearth. Clara heard only the rain and the low steadiness of the man before her. "I can clear your father's obligations," Alexander continued. "I can protect this estate from those who would ruin it through pride. I can offer you Whitmore Hall, my name, and every courtesy my rank requires." Clara's lips parted, but he raised one hand slightly. stopping her with restraint rather than command. But I will not choose you as punishment to them, nor as convenience to myself. A flicker passed through her expression, the exact wound he had guessed. Then why? She asked. The question was barely above a whisper. Alexander looked at the ledger, then at the rain on her hem, then at the bright, brave face that had walked late into a room arranged to erase her. Because you walked in carrying someone colder than yourself, he said. Because you told the truth when lies would have been safer. Because every person here tried to make you seem small and failed. Clara's eyes shone, though no tear fell. Her liveliness did not disappear in that moment. It deepened, becoming something steadier, something that could survive beyond the walls that had confined it. But she was still Clara Bennet, and Clara Bennet had not endured years of polite dismissal only to be swept into another life without a choice. She lifted her chin. If I answer, Your Grace, I will answer for myself. Not for my father's debt, not for their shame, not because you have defended me. Alexander bowed his head, the slightest movement, yet the room understood its meaning. A duke had yielded the floor to the girl they had hidden. Then answer for yourself. Clara looked once at her father, who could not meet her gaze, then at her sisters, then at Margaret, whose anger had begun to look very much like fear. At last, Clara turned back to Alexander. I will consider your offer, she said. But before I agree to anything, the tenants are protected in writing. Mrs. Hale receives the wages she is owed. Thomas sees a doctor tomorrow morning, and my mother's orchard remains mine. Margaret gasped. Vivian stared. Rosalind went still. Alexander Whitmore, who had arrived prepared to command, looked at Clara Bennet as if the first honest thing in years had just asked him to prove himself worthy of hearing it. Then he said, Done. The word done changed the future of Bennet Manor before anyone inside it had time to understand what had been lost or saved. Alexander gave instructions to his solicitor with a calm that made every promise sound already written, witnessed, and sealed. The tenants would be protected through winter. The overdue wages would be paid before noon the next day. A physician would be sent to Thomas by morning. The south orchard, planted by Clara's mother along the low hill beyond the kitchen garden, would be placed legally in Clara's name. Margaret tried twice to object, and twice found herself silenced, not by force, but by the unbearable weight of having no moral ground left on which to stand. Vivian sat rigid beneath the chandelier, her beauty turned pale by anger. Rosalind watched Clara with wounded disbelief, as though the sister she had mocked had secretly been standing on higher ground all along. Mr. Bennet signed where he was told to sign, his hand shaking over the papers that Alexander's man drew up at the small writing desk near the window. Clara remained near the hearth, wrapped now in a dry shawl Mrs. Hale had brought her, her chestnut hair slowly loosening as it dried, her blue eyes moving from face to face as if memorizing the last shape of the life that had held her. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt the ache of leaving even a house that had not always loved her. Pain, she was discovering, did not become simple merely because justice had entered the room. At last, Alexander turned to her. My carriage is ready, Miss Bennet. Margaret gave a sharp breath. Surely she is not leaving tonight. Clara almost smiled at the irony. For years, Margaret had wanted her unseen. Now, when a duke offered her a door, the woman sounded offended that Clara might walk through it. The rain has lightened, Alexander said. The road to Whitmore Hall is passable. She will travel with Mrs. Hale as companion if she wishes, and arrangements can be made properly in the morning. Mrs. Hale stepped forward at once. I will go with Miss Clara. Clara looked at the elderly maid, and something tender broke through the tension. You do not have to. I know, miss. Mrs. Hale's smile trembled. That is why I can. The farewell that followed was stranger than sorrow and colder than celebration. Vivian did not embrace her. Rosalind whispered, You always do this. Make everyone feel cruel for wanting anything. Clara turned to her, and for a moment the lively girl from earlier returned, not laughing now, but clear and bright. No, Rosalind. I only made everyone look. Her father stood last. Mr. Bennet reached for her hand, then stopped as if uncertain he still had the right. Clara, I should have seen you. She answered gently, because cruelty had never suited her, not even when deserved. Yes, Papa. You should have. That was all. It was enough. The front doors opened to the night. Cold air swept through the hall, carrying the scent of wet leaves, gravel, and rain-soaked earth. Clara stepped outside beneath the portico, where the lamps of the Duke's carriage burned gold against the darkness. Bennet Manor rose behind her, every window lit, every secret exposed, while ahead the long black road curved toward a house she had never seen and a future she had not yet promised to accept. Alexander offered his hand to help her into the carriage. Clara looked at it for half a second before placing her gloved fingers over his. His touch was steady, formal, and gone the moment she was safely seated. That restraint mattered. She noticed. Across from her, Alexander settled into shadow, his face briefly lit by the swinging lantern as the carriage began to move. Mrs. Hale sat beside Clara, hands folded tightly in her lap, pretending not to watch them both. For several minutes, there was only the sound of wheels over wet gravel and rain slipping from the carriage roof. Then Clara saw Alexander draw an old pocket watch from his waistcoat. He did not open it fully, but the lantern caught a glimpse of a painted miniature inside, a woman with soft dark hair and solemn eyes. His thumb rested against the rim as if memory had weight. Was she your wife? Clara asked softly. Alexander's gaze remained on the watch. Yes. Did she love Whitmore Hall? His answer took time. She feared it at the end. The words cooled the carriage more than the night outside. Clara did not press him, though questions rose in her like birds startled from trees. Alexander closed the watch and held it in his fist. My house does not need a duchess for ornament, Miss Bennet. It needs someone unafraid of locked doors, silent servants, and ghosts people prefer to call rumors. Clara looked through the window, where the road ahead vanished between dark fields silvered by rain. She thought of Bennet Manor, of the blue ledger, of the child at the gate, of the orchard now hers, of a room that had finally been forced to see her. Then she looked back at the Duke. Perhaps you chose the wrong daughter, she said. For the first time that night, Alexander's expression almost softened. No, he replied. For the first time in years, I believe I chose the right one. The carriage rolled on toward Whitmore Hall, where windows waited like watchful eyes behind the rain, and where Clara Bennet would soon learn that some houses are not haunted by the dead, but by the truths the living refuse to speak.